The wedding was beautiful. I'll give Derek that much. White roses cascading from crystal vases, a string quartet playing Pachelbel's canon, 300 guests in designer formal wear filling the grand ballroom of the Harrington estate. Everything was perfect, expensive, and deliberately designed to impress. I sat at table 14. Not the family table, that was reserved for Derek, his new bride Vanessa, our parents and Vanessa's wealthy relatives. Table 14 was near the kitchen, wedged between the bar and the service entrance, where waiters bumped my chair every time they passed with champagne trays. My place card had a small note written in my mother's handwriting, "Please don't embarrass us tonight." The speeches started after the main course. Vanessa's father talked about legacy and success. The best man made jokes about Derek's restaurant empire, 3 locations now with a 4th opening next spring. Then Derek took the microphone. "I want to thank everyone who made this day possible," he began, his teeth gleaming in that practice smile he'd perfected for magazine covers. "My beautiful bride. My supportive parents. My incredible team at Harbor Street Bistro." He paused, scanning the crowd until his eyes found mine. "And I suppose I should acknowledge my sister Natalie, who managed to show up tonight." Polite laughter rippled through the room. "Though I have to say, Nat, that gift was interesting." He held up the handmade photo album I'd spent 3 months creating. Pictures of us as kids, family memories, letters from relatives who'd passed. "I guess when you're financially useless you have to get creative, right? Can't even afford a real gift." The laughter wasn't polite anymore. It was loud, pointed, and accompanied by glances in my direction. I saw my mother hide her face. My father shook his head slowly. Vanessa's family whispered behind their napkins. I nodded politely. Then I pulled out my phone and texted Raymond Chin, my property manager. "Begin lease termination for 443 Harbor Street. Standard 90-day notice. Non-renewal of commercial lease. Send it tonight." His reply came in 12 seconds. "Confirmed. Sending registered letter now. Should I notify the other Harbor Street properties as well?" I typed back, "All 3 locations. Non-renewal across the board." The band started playing Derek and Vanessa's first dance song. Somewhere between the second verse and the chorus, Derek's phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. By the time the song ended, he'd excused himself to check his messages. I watched his face through the glass doors of the garden terrace, watched it shift from confusion to concern to something approaching panic. I raised my champagne glass to no one in particular and took a long, slow sip. Derek was born first. That was his greatest achievement, and somehow it defined everything that came after. In our family, the firstborn son was treated like royalty. Our parents, both immigrants who'd built a small grocery store into a regional chain, believed in tradition above all else. The son inherited. The son led. The son mattered. Daughters were afterthoughts. Loved, sure, but never invested in. Never expected to amount to anything. "Natalie will marry well," Mom used to say, as if that was the ceiling of my ambition. "Derek will build the empire." So Derek got the business school tuition. Derek got the startup capital. Derek got the introductions to investors and the seats at important dinners. I got a pat on the head and suggestions about nice young men from nice families who might want a quiet, obedient wife. I had other plans. While Derek was partying through his MBA, I was working 3 jobs. Server at a diner, night clerk at a hotel, weekend bookkeeper for a local accountant who saw something in me that my parents never bothered to look for. I saved every dollar that didn't go to rent and ramen noodles. "Why don't you just ask Mom and Dad for help?" Derek asked once, visiting my studio apartment that was smaller than his walk-in closet. "Oh wait, I forgot. They only invest in winners." I smiled and said nothing. By then I'd already made my first real estate purchase. A rundown duplex in a neighborhood everyone said was hopeless. The seller practically laughed when I made my offer. "Good luck, kid," he said. "That place is a money pit." He was wrong. I fixed it up myself, learning plumbing from YouTube tutorials at midnight and electrical work from library books I checked out 3 at a time. I spent weekends patching drywall and refinishing hardwood floors. My hands were permanently calloused, my knees were bruised from crawling through crawl spaces, and I loved every minute of it. I rented both units within 2 months. The rental income covered the mortgage and left enough for savings. I used that savings as a down payment on another property. Then another. Each one taught me something new: how to negotiate with contractors, how to spot hidden water damage, how to evaluate a neighborhood's potential before the market caught on. The accountant I worked for, Mr. Patterson, noticed what I was doing. "You've got an eye for value," he said. "Most people see problems. You see potential." He introduced me to his brother-in-law, a commercial real estate developer who was looking for someone to manage his smaller holdings. Within 5 years, I wasn't just managing properties. I was buying them. By 30, I owned 14 residential buildings and 7 commercial properties, all held through a series of LLCs that kept my name out of public records. Total portfolio value, $23.4 million. Annual rental income, $1.7 million. Net worth after debt service, somewhere in the neighborhood of $8 million. But I still drove a 10-year-old Honda. Still wore clothes from Target. Still lived in a modest townhouse that I'd bought at a foreclosure auction. Not because I couldn't afford better, but because I'd learned something valuable in all those years of being underestimated. Invisibility is power. My family never asked what I did for a living. They assumed I was scraping by on some administrative job, probably temping, probably struggling. That assumption let them maintain their narrative. Derek was the success, Natalie was the disappointment, and I was content to let them believe it. Until 443 Harbor Street. 3 years ago, a commercial building came up for sale in the waterfront district. Prime location, beautiful bones, but the previous owner had let it deteriorate badly. Most investors passed. The asking price was too high for the condition, and the renovation costs would be substantial. I saw something else. I saw a building 1 block from the new marina development. I saw rising property values as the neighborhood gentrified. I saw a ground floor restaurant space with water views that would be worth a fortune once the area transformed. I bought the building through Sandpiper Holdings LLC for $2.1 million. I spent another $400,000 on renovations. And then I started fielding calls from restaurants wanting to lease the ground floor. Derek called me that Christmas, which was unusual. We typically only spoke at family gatherings, and even then barely. "Natalie, I need a favor," he said, no preamble, no small talk. "There's a building on Harbor Street that would be perfect for my second restaurant location. The landlord is some company called Sandpiper Holdings. Do you know anyone who could put in a good word?" I almost laughed. "Almost. I'll see what I can do," I said. The lease I offered was generous. Below market rate, flexible terms, tenant improvement allowance. Raymond, my property manager, thought I was crazy. "This space could command $18,000 a month easy. You're giving it away at $12,000. "Trust me," I said. "This tenant is exactly what I want." What I wanted, if I'm being honest, was to help my brother succeed. Despite everything, the dismissals, the mockery, the decades of being treated like a second-class family member, some part of me still craved his approval. Still thought that maybe if I helped him enough, he'd finally see me as an equal. Harbor Street Bistro opened to rave reviews. Food critics praised the waterfront ambience. Instagram influencers posed in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the marina. Derek was interviewed by the local news, called a rising star in the culinary scene. He never mentioned the below-market rent that made his profit margins possible. He never wondered why a landlord would be so generous to an unproven restaurateur. Within 6 months, Derek was looking for a second location. I happened to own a building 3 blocks away that would be perfect. The timing was almost too convenient, but Derek never questioned it. Why would he? In his mind, he was successful because he was brilliant. The universe was simply rewarding his brilliance. Then a third location. Another building I owned, another below-market lease, another step in Derek's rising empire. Each time I structured the deal through different subsidiaries, different property managers, different law firms. The paper trail was deliberately complex. I didn't want Derek to find out, not because I was hiding, but because I wanted to see what he would do when he thought no one was watching. When he thought his success was entirely his own. All 3 Harbor Street Bistro locations operated in buildings owned by Sandpiper Holdings LLC. All 3 paid rent that went directly into my accounts. And Derek had no idea that his little sister, the financially useless one who couldn't afford a real wedding gift, was the foundation his entire business empire stood upon. The combined monthly rent was $38,000. I'd given him a family discount of roughly $16,000 per month. Over 3 years, that added up to over $576,000 in subsidies I'd quietly provided to a brother who thought I couldn't manage a checkbook. At every family gathering, Derek bragged about his restaurant success while I sat silently at the edges. At every holiday, my parents praised his business acumen while barely acknowledging my existence. At every birthday party, Derek made jokes about my situation, while literally writing rent checks to my property manager. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was above petty revenge. I told myself that being the silent benefactor was its own reward. And then he called me financially useless at his wedding in front of 300 people, and something inside me finally snapped. Derek returned from the terrace looking like he'd seen a ghost. Vanessa grabbed his arm as he passed the head table. "What's wrong? You're white as a sheet." "It's nothing," he said, but his voice cracked. "Just a business thing. I'll handle it tomorrow." But his eyes kept finding his phone. And his phone kept buzzing. His business partner called. His general manager called. His accountant called, which is never a good sign at 9 p.m. on a Saturday. I watched it all from table 14, nursing my champagne, feeling something I'd never quite experienced before. Satisfaction. Not joy. This wasn't about joy. It was about finally refusing to absorb abuse with a smile. Finally acknowledging that my silence hadn't earned me respect. It had only invited more contempt. Finally understanding that some people don't deserve your grace, even if they're family. The reception continued, but Derek was barely present. He smiled for photos with the mechanical precision of a man whose mind was elsewhere. He danced with relatives while checking his phone between songs. By 11 p.m., he and Vanessa had a whispered argument near the coat check that ended with her storming toward the bridal suite. I left quietly without saying goodbye. No one noticed. No one ever did. The calls started Monday morning. First, Derek's business partner, Marcus, contacted Sandpiper Holdings directly. Raymond took the call. "We've received notice of non-renewal on all 3 of our leases," Marcus said, his voice tight. "There must be some mistake. We've been model tenants. We pay on time. We've never had a single violation." "No mistake," Raymond replied, following my instructions. "The property owner has decided to pursue other opportunities for these spaces. You have 90 days as specified in your lease agreements. But you can't. We've built our entire business around these locations. The Harbor Street brand is tied to the waterfront district. Moving would destroy everything we've built." "I'm sorry," Raymond said. "The decision is final." Derek called me on Wednesday. I let it go to voicemail. "Natalie, something weird is going on. I need your help. You said you knew someone connected to Sandpiper Holdings. Can you please call them? We just got notice that all 3 of our leases are being terminated. This is a disaster. Please call me back." He called again on Thursday. And Friday. By the weekend, his messages had shifted from confused to desperate. "Natalie, I don't know why you're not answering. I really need your help here. We've been looking for alternative locations, but everything in the waterfront district is either taken or costs twice what we're paying now. The Harbor Street brand depends on being on Harbor Street. Please, if you have any connection to these landlords, I'm begging you." I saved every message. Not out of cruelty, out of documentation. After years of being dismissed as useless, I wanted a record of my brother begging for my help. My parents called too. That was unexpected. "Natalie, your brother is in trouble," Mom said, her tone making it clear this was somehow my fault. "His restaurants are losing their leases. He says you might know the landlord. Why aren't you helping him?" "I don't know what you're talking about," I said. "Don't play games. He said you helped him get those leases in the first place. Now you need to help him keep them." "Mom, I'm financially useless, remember? I can barely afford a real gift. How would I possibly have connections to commercial real estate?" She hung up without saying goodbye. Derek showed up at my townhouse 3 weeks after the wedding. He looked terrible, unshaven, exhausted, wearing a wrinkled polo shirt that probably cost more than my entire outfit but looked like he'd slept in it. "We need to talk," he said when I opened the door. "Do we?" "Natalie, please. I'm losing everything. 3 restaurants. 47 employees. Everything I've built for the past 8 years. Just let me in." I stepped aside. He walked into my living room and stopped, looking around like he'd never seen a normal house before. He probably hadn't visited since I bought the place 5 years ago. Why would he? I was just his useless sister. Nice place, he said surprised. I thought. You thought what? That I lived in a cardboard box. He had the decency to look embarrassed. I don't know what I thought. Look, that's not why I'm here. I need your help with Sandpiper Holdings. You said you knew someone there. I've tried everything, lawyers, real estate agents, even a private investigator to find out who owns the company. It's all shell corporations. I can't find an actual person to talk to. Why should I help you? He blinked. Because you're my sister? I'm your financially useless sister, remember? The one who can't afford a real gift? The one you mocked in front of 300 people at your wedding? I sat down on my couch, leaving him standing. Why would the family disappointment have connections to a commercial real estate portfolio worth millions? I was joking. You know I was joking. Were you? Because it didn't feel like a joke. It felt like every family dinner for the past 20 years. Every holiday where you bragged about your success while I sat in the corner. Every birthday party where you reminded everyone that I was the failure while you were the golden child. Natalie. Do you know why your rent was so low, Derek? I asked quietly. Below market rate on prime waterfront commercial space? Tenant improvement allowances? Flexible lease terms? Did you ever wonder why a landlord would be so generous to a restaurant with no track record? He stared at me. I watched the gears turn. I gave you those terms because you're my brother, I continued. I gave you those buildings because I wanted to help you succeed. Sandpiper Holdings LLC is my company, Derek. Has been for 7 years. You've been paying rent to your financially useless sister this entire time. The color drained from his face. That's not possible. I pulled out my phone and opened the Sandpiper Holdings corporate documents. Would you like to see the articles of incorporation? The property deeds? The bank statements showing $38,000 per month in rent payments from Harbor Street Bistro LLC, your company, depositing directly into my accounts. He sat down heavily in the armchair across from me, all the strength gone from his legs. For 3 years, I said, I've subsidized your business to the tune of $16,000 per month in below-market rent. That's $576,000 I essentially gave you, Derek. While you called me useless. While you joked about my poverty at family gatherings. While Mom and Dad praised your business genius, never knowing that your genius was built on your sister's real estate portfolio. Why didn't you tell me? His voice was barely a whisper. Would it have changed anything? Would you have treated me with respect if you'd known I was your landlord? Or would you have just resented me more? The little sister who dared to succeed without permission? He didn't answer. We both knew what the answer was. I spent 20 years being invisible in this family, I said. Being the afterthought. Being the joke. And you know what? I built an $8 million real estate portfolio while you were busy feeling superior. I own 14 residential buildings and 7 commercial properties. I have tenants in 3 states. And I did it all without a single dollar from Mom and Dad, without a single introduction from their network, without a single moment of the support they lavished on you. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, a normal suburban street continued its normal suburban life, oblivious to the earthquake happening in my living room. The gift I gave you at your wedding, the photo album, took me 3 months to make. I tracked down pictures from relatives who've passed. I wrote letters to cousins who haven't spoken to us in years. I put together a history of our family that money couldn't buy. And you held it up in front of 300 people and called me financially useless for not being able to afford something real. I turned back to face him. That was my real gift, Derek. My time. My effort. My love. And you treated it like garbage. You treated me like garbage. In front of your new wife's family, in front of everyone we know, you made sure the whole world understood that Natalie Chin was worthless. He was crying now. Actually crying, tears streaming down his face. I'd never seen my brother cry, not even at our grandfather's funeral. Not even when his first restaurant almost failed in its opening month and he thought his dreams were over. Derek didn't cry. Derek conquered. Derek succeeded. Derek dominated. Except now Derek was broken. I'm sorry, he said. Natalie, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. You didn't want to know. That's different. You needed me to be a failure so you could feel like a success. You needed someone to look down on so you could feel tall. It's a pattern, Derek. It's been a pattern our whole lives. You standing on my shoulders and pretending you got there on your own. That's not. It is. And I let you. For years I let you because I thought if I just helped you enough, supported you enough, stayed invisible enough, eventually you'd see me as an equal. Eventually you'd acknowledge that I had value beyond being the family disappointment you could mock at parties. I shook my head. That was my mistake. You were never going to see me as an equal. You were only ever going to see what you needed to see. What do I have to do? Derek asked. To make this right. To save my restaurants. Please, Natalie. 47 people depend on me. Whatever you want, I'll do it. I want you to understand something, I said. I'm not doing this to destroy you. I'm doing this because I finally realized that my generosity was enabling your cruelty. Every time I gave you a below-market lease, I was teaching you that you could treat me like garbage and still benefit from my success. So what happens now? Now you pay market rate. If you want to stay in my buildings, you pay what any other tenant would pay. That's $54,000 per month, not $38,000. And you sign a new lease that clearly identifies the landlord as Sandpiper Holdings LLC, owned by Natalie Chen. He did the math in his head. That's an extra $192,000 per year. We can't absorb that. Our margins are already thin. Then you'll have to run a more efficient operation. Or find other locations. Or close some restaurants. That's your business decision to make. I'm not your silent benefactor anymore. And if I can't make it work, if I have to close, then you'll learn what it feels like to build something from nothing. The way I did. I walked to the door and opened it. You have until the end of the week to decide. Sign the new lease at market rate or the termination notice stands. He stood slowly like an old man. At the door he paused. I really am sorry, Natalie. For everything. I know, I said. But sorry doesn't undo 20 years. Actions might. We'll see. Derek signed the new lease. He had to close one of his 3 locations, the one with the weakest revenue, but the other 2 survived. More importantly, they survived on real terms without his sister secretly subsidizing his success. The family dynamics shifted dramatically after the truth came out. Derek told our parents everything, partly to explain his financial difficulties, partly because, as he later admitted, he was ashamed and needed to confess. The conversation happened at their house without me present. Derek called me afterward to tell me how it went. Mom cried, he said. Not the way she cries at movies. Real crying. I think she finally understood what she did to you. What we all did. And Dad. Dad didn't say much. You know how he is. But he kept looking at this old photo of us on the mantle. The one from your high school graduation. He said he was proud of you then, but he never told you. He said a lot of things he never told you. Mom called me the day after his confession. For the first time in my life, she didn't have anything dismissive to say. I don't understand, she kept repeating. How did you, when did you, why didn't you tell us? While you were investing in Derek's future, I said calmly, I was building my own. You just never thought to look. Dad was quieter about it. He sent me an email, not a call, an email that said simply, I'm proud of you. I should have said that years ago. I'm sorry I didn't. Coming from him, it was practically a Shakespearean declaration of love. The biggest change was Derek himself. Something broke in him that day in my living room, some wall of arrogance that had been propping up his self-image. Without it, he was left with the uncomfortable reality that his success had been partly built on the generosity of someone he'd treated with contempt. He started therapy. He apologized to me publicly at the next family gathering, standing up at Thanksgiving dinner and telling everyone, including Vanessa's family, exactly what he'd done and exactly what I'd done for him. It was awkward and uncomfortable and probably the most honest moment our family had ever shared. I called my sister financially useless, he said, his voice cracking, while she was literally paying my rent. I mocked her for not having a career while she was building an empire that dwarfed mine. I was so busy feeling superior that I couldn't see what was right in front of me. The room was silent. Vanessa reached for his hand. Mom was crying. Dad was staring at his plate like he could teleport into it. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Derek continued. I'm just asking for the chance to earn it. To prove that I can be the brother Natalie deserved all along. He looked at me across the table. I nodded. Just once. It was a start. We're not best friends now. We may never be. But we're something we never were before. honest. He calls me to ask advice about his business. Actually asks, actually listens. I've started coming to family dinners again, and I no longer sit at the metaphorical kids' table. Last month, Derek's remaining 2 restaurants were featured in a local magazine. The article mentioned his strategic partnership with Sandpiper Holdings and praised his innovative landlord-tenant collaboration. He made sure to tell the reporter that his sister was the silent genius behind Sandpiper. "It's the least I can do," he said when I thanked him. "You built the stage. I just performed on it." As for my real estate portfolio, it continues to grow. I closed on 2 more commercial properties last quarter, and I'm in negotiations for a small office building downtown. My net worth recently crossed the $12 million mark. I still drive the 10-year-old Honda, but I'm thinking about upgrading. Not because I need to prove anything. Those days are over. But because maybe it's time to stop hiding. Invisibility was power when I needed protection. But now I have something better than power. I have respect. From my family, from myself, from everyone who once looked past me. The other day, Mom called to ask my advice about investing some of her retirement savings in real estate. "You seem to know what you're doing," she said, and I could hear the effort it took her to admit that. "I've picked up a few things," I said, smiling. We talked for an hour. She asked real questions. She listened to my answers. She didn't compare me to Derek once. It was, in its own small way, a miracle. Because here's what they all finally understand. I was never useless. I was underestimated. And sometimes that's the biggest advantage of all. You build empires best when no one's watching.